The Lumintop Tool AA 2.0 Nichia Lens. This is a flashlight I've had for about a year now, which is always an interesting opportunity to go back and review from a different thought process than an initial impression style review would have been. I've owned a lot of flashlights over the years, especially after a hot streak a few years ago of having been sent a whole bunch of them in a row for a review. I can't recall any of them except for maybe the Olight M2R that immediately ingratiated itself to me like the Tool AA did. The smooth mode switching action from the tail button and battery versatility felt like exactly what you'd expect from a light with Tool in the name. More on the battery in a minute. And maybe the smoothness of the mode switching seems like a funny thing to highlight, but it's really the best I've ever tried, and the difference it makes isn't clear until you cycle through yourself a few times and see the speed at which you can do it. Normally I'm not a big fan of lights with 5 or more modes because I find it a pain to cycle through all of them, especially when I really only probably use 2 of them most of the time. But in this case I think it's largely how well this light handles mode switching that accounts for that not being an annoyance to me. Even though indeed I am pretty much only using medium and high mode 90% of the time. Over the last year, I've accidentally left it in a pants pocket through the wash twice. Both times it turned right on afterward, and though I did remove the battery and let it dry out thoroughly just to make sure, it really does speak to its water resistance claims to survive being fully submerged in soapy water without shorting out. The Nichia lens puts out a very pleasing light color tone that resembles natural sunlight. If you've not used one before, you might be surprised what a difference that can make in your perception of detail in the dark. Not to mention that it seems less hard on the eyes than very cool colored lights do in the dark when your eyes might be struggling to balance how dark the space is against the brightness of your light. I'll highlight what I think is the best feature of this light as well as its biggest drawback next. To me, the battery versatility in such a small size is what makes this the ultimate pocket light. The ability to use any standard AA battery as well as a rechargeable nickel metal hydride AA or even a 14500 lithium ion for extra brightness lets you optimize for your use case and readily have backups in almost any situation. On a lot of other lights I've used, you're often choosing between battery availability or maximum brightness. Basically, do you want to use common batteries like AA's, or do you want to have super high lumens that you would only get from lithium ion? The idea to be able to accomplish both in one light is pretty cool. But in a way, that versatility in such a small size also becomes a drawback when it comes to heat. In most of the modes this is not an issue, but in the turbo mode with either battery configuration, the bezel gets stinging hot in under 60 seconds. Something I discovered the hard way the first time I used it in my backyard at night. I guess it's not surprising given how difficult good heat sinking is in such a small body, and it is cool to have a pocket light that can boast 600 lumens, but it's not a mode that you would realistically use for any length of time. I'd say it's useful if there's an animal or something else you need to shine the light at and get as much detail as possible for 30 seconds or so and then step back down. But if you were in a situation where you wanted to illuminate a whole area for a while, you'd be reaching for a bigger light. It's also worth noting that the turbo mode's brightness on either battery setting is fleeting. This is similar to many flashlights that boast an incredible lumen number, but the fine print makes it clear that that only happens with a freshly charged battery, and it can only maintain that brightness for a couple of minutes or less. This is why I pretty much ignore turbo modes on a lot of lights that I'm looking at, and I only pay attention to the high mode, since my experience is that's a better indicator of what you can really expect to be able to use most of the time on that light until the battery is almost dead. I.e., if you've been using it day after day, or you've had it in your pocket and you don't remember exactly how many days ago you had charged it, you know your battery is between somewhere of decent charge and maybe getting low. High is a decent thing to be able to expect what you might get when you need a lot of brightness that isn't as dependent on exactly ideal battery charges. The medium mode and high mode are sufficient for pretty much any circumstance that you'd be using a pocket light, especially when you're using the lithium ion battery that ends up making the medium mode more like the regular battery's high mode. The low mode is a good trade-off of brightness for longevity, something I feel the Tool AA gets right a lot better than some lights that I've used. I personally don't have much use for a 1.5 or less lumen mode that some lights have. I find that that's just too dim anytime I've tried it to be useful. Except I suppose maybe a survival scenario where you had to have literally any degree of extra light and keeping the battery going for as long as possible is a benefit. But this light's 3.7 lumens with nickel metal hydride or 16 lumens on lithium ion to me make for a much more usable low mode that still gives you up to 60 hours of runtime. I guess in conclusion, some people might argue that this is a light that tries to be too many things at once and doesn't necessarily do the best job that it could at all of those things, especially that heat generation in the highest modes. But I think what it does offer in such a small size that you can fit in your pocket, plus like I said, that swappability of batteries, makes for an ideal pocket light that can serve a variety of situations and has long enough battery life modes, even in the medium modes, to be useful for everyday usage where you're not constantly asking yourself, wait, when was the last time I charged this? Am I still going to be good for today? It's been my everyday flashlight for most of the last year that I've had it, and it's certainly something I would recommend for anyone looking for a small light that you could just carry in a pocket that's going to serve most of the time, in place of your larger light you might carry in a backpack or something like that. Thanks for watching.